Welcome to an episode of Kendra is Not Okay. And let me tell you, if you've read this book, you understand why. I was really nervous going into this book because we already know the outcome. We know how Haymitch's games went to a very vague degree. If you know nothing else about Haymitch's games, you know that he won because he is alive for Katniss's games 24 years later. But even more than Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I feel like this book is proof that all of us circa 2011 owe Suzanne Collins an apology. Because I feel like The Hunger Games was one of those stories that happening kind of in the shadow of Twilight, happening in this time period in young adult where love triangles are everything. A lot of people kind of push off The Hunger Games because it was just another love triangle story. Never mind, that was never really about love so much as Katniss choosing between two sides of herself. This is one of those videos where I'm going to be eating popcorn in between my cuts because it's my emotional support snack and I need it. In the words of our Lord and Savior Gerard Way, I'm not okay. And at this point, some of y'all might be, Kendra, you're being kind of over dramatic about this. Let me tell you, I am being exactly as dramatic as the situation needs. In fact, I may be a little under dramatic at this point because I am so severely not okay. This book broke me. Like, I had a lot of feelings when I was reading through Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for everything that Snow was going through, and how I can kind of understand how he became the villain, because early on in his book, there's a lot of, I'll say, redeemable factors about him where he could swing either way. It just happens that he ends up swinging towards evil. Snow as a character is very much out for himself, out for what is best for him. What can he do to make himself look good? What can he do to make Snow land on top? But there are definitely points throughout Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that seem like he could turn. Like, maybe it's not all selfishness. Maybe he does have a heart. It is really interesting to contrast the characterizations and the voices between Ballad and Sunrise. Snow very much has the sort of growth mindset, that whole saying of Snow lands on top, whereas Haymitch has already been beaten down by the world by the time we reach his narrative. For Snow, his darkest moments often come with a light at the end of the tunnel. There's always this sort of silver lining to it. He always has something to go back to. It's also intriguing because there's this clear contrast in perspective of who's right and who's wrong. Because Snow obviously takes the side of the Capitol and saying that the Capitol was right, the districts were what caused the dark days. Had the districts just submitted, everything would have been fine. Whereas Haymitch, of course, being a victim of the Hunger Games, has basically the exact opposite vibe. This book is a tragedy through and through. It is a story that just keeps getting darker and darker the further in you go. Every moment that it seems like Haymitch might catch a break, every moment where it feels like maybe things will start to look up for him, it all just sort of crumbles further. This book went real heavy on themes of submission. There are a total of 4 quotes that start this book off, which really sets a tone. But the quote that stands out the most to me in terms of just vibes and the theme of this book and the theme of Haymitch's progression. It is therefore on opinion only that government is founded. A government only functions because the people under that government have decided it should, or that it can. The issue is that sometimes those systems become so large with so many people backing it, and so many people afraid not to back it. These are some of the same lessons that Snow learned in his book, but it is laid out brutally in this one. Snow only has power because there are enough people that are terrified of what would happen if they didn't follow him. And so the more people submit to his power, the more control he has. and the harder it is for those voices to break through in opposition. There's a slight emphasis on how sickly Snow is. He is not healthy, he is not well. It's kind of answered why he is not well at this point. A little oysters, a little poisoning, you know, normal things. But he is a frail man. And it's really interesting throughout the entire series how Suzanne Collins characterizes him, because we know deep down that he is just a person. He's just a man. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes confirms this is just a person, a broken boy. Through the original Hunger Games trilogy, he seems like this monolithic being. He is God, all the way up until the end, when Katniss knows she is going to kill him. Spoilers? I guess, I don't know. The books have been out for a hot minute. But, like, his mortality is very clear. He is not going to live forever. And it is so well done here that we get the whole range of Snow as a character, even though we don't really see him that often. Because we see him as this monolithic figure early on at the parade when Haymitch is carrying the person to Snow, because we have this sort of faraway vision of Snow during the parade. We don't hear him speak, we just see him. He is just present. There's definitely a fear of backlash, but then Haymitch actually gets to speak with him while Snow is ill. And so quickly and so easily we go from Snow being this fragile mortal being back to being this terrifying monster. It's absolutely unstoppable, malevolent being. And he just sort of stays in this almost demonic, godlike range for the rest of the narrative. Because even his most loyal followers are against him, but they don't dare say so out loud. They don't dare act on it. This book does a beautiful job of the sort of balancing act that comes between government being a matter of opinion and the actual consequences that come with treating government like it is a matter of opinion. The consequences that come from standing up against this force. By the way, this is Evelyn. She's my baby. She has no idea what's going on right now. She just knows that I'm sitting over here eating popcorn. For everything that happened during Haymitch's Hunger Games, I do kind of wonder if Snow let him live on purpose. If Snow purposely rigged the games to help Haymitch win. I say this specifically because there are some very heavily rigged elements in this particular Hunger Games. I have a theory that Snow may still have a soft spot for the girl that disappeared in the woods, and that he feels a connection to Haymitch because of that. And I feel like there is a degree to which he wants somebody to feel the same way he felt. Obviously, he cannot recreate that feeling exactly, but he can come pretty close-ish. Anyways, I think back to around 2011 and people saying that the Hunger Games was very flat. It was very poorly written. The issue that I have with that idea, with that opinion, I should say, is that Katniss is already an extremely traumatized individual. She has been forced to grow up too fast. She has already experienced so much. She is a very haunted individual. Life has dragged her down and she is traumatized and she thinks that everything is out to get her from the get-go. Snow is also a very damaged character, but in kind of different ways. It's a different flavor of being damaged and traumatized. Where Katniss has sort of shut down and gone very mechanical and very, I'll say monotone. Like she very much suppresses her feelings because she understands that they're not going to be helpful to her. Whereas Snow is afforded the ability to kind of feel his feelings. Haymitch too is a very broken character, but he's kind of a different flavor. He has been allowed to sort of sit with his feelings. He has not completely given up hope at the beginning of the story. Similar to Snow. He's very broken, he's very beat down, but he has things to cling to. He has hopes, he has aspirations. So I feel like even though I'm like, I don't even want to know how long into recording this video, I feel like the first big compliment that I really want to throw at this book, even though I feel like I've already been kind of singing praises for however long I've been recording so far, is how well she has been able to create her characters and make them all feel very distinctive. These are all very different voices, these are all very different perspectives. In the way that the stories are framed, like obviously the characters themselves have their own feelings and opinions on their circumstance. But there is enough breathing room that as a reader you can kind of understand where the character might be an unreliable narrator. We're harkening back to the ballad with this one primarily. She does such a good job at also illustrating a sort of descent into madness and making the different types of descent feel distinctive as well. Because there are a few points while Haymitch is like in the arena where he is alone and terrified of being killed and terrified of his allies also meeting tragic endings. There's this sort of hysteria that builds up, and then as the story continues and more tragedy unfolds, there's this different kind of descent into madness at play, and they both feel very unique and distinct from each other. Can I just say that in reading this book though, I don't know who they're going to get to play Haymitch. I feel like Woody Harrelson is Haymitch, and I don't know how they're going to get a younger looking actor that can carry forth that same vibe. I feel like I saw something online that was basically just like, when they make this movie, which they are making this movie, it was announced at the same time as the book. I feel like when they make it, they need to just bring Woody Harrelson back and just put him in a backwards baseball cap and call him 16. We get an epilogue that has a little bit of a taste of the end of Mockingjay, maybe a little post-Mockingjay. And it makes me hope, beyond all hopes, that they will bring back the original cast. Do I believe that will actually happen? No, but it would be amazing for them to. I love the character interactions in general throughout this story. It is very much giving sort of that setup for Catching Fire Mockingjay, and I feel like I can't say too much more about that without it being spoilery. All in all, absolutely recommend this book. If you're at all interested in the Hunger Games universe, if you're at all interested in Haymitch as a character, because it really makes sense why he is the way that he is. And it really makes sense why things turn in the original Hunger Games trilogy. As I mentioned, going into this book, I was terrified that it would be kind of a snooze fest because, like, we kind of already know what's going on. We already know what happened, but we really don't. Like, we know the basic of Haymitch gets out, Haymitch wins, Haymitch survives, and he is the sole victor in District 12. But in truth, until you read Sunrise on the Reaping, you know nothing. If you've not been involved in the Hunger Games up to this point, I would strongly recommend reading the books in publishing order, especially because the epilogue of Sunrise kind of spoils the majority of the trilogy and I feel like it may not necessarily make sense unless you've read the original trilogy. I do feel like though, if you are just interested in this book and you're like, I want to get to this book as soon as possible, you could do Ballad later. See, I've been working on a massive bookbinding project that I say I've been working on it. I haven't touched it in 3 months. But now I kind of want to do a rebinding of the Hunger Games where we put everything kind of in chronological order. I also kind of want to wait a couple of years because I feel like there's room for the universe to grow. There are still characters that we very well could do more exploration into. Whether or not Suzanne Collins will, I don't know, but this book in particular felt very pointed, felt very philosophical, felt very political, very much calling attention to the fact that what is happening in these stories is not something that should be glorified. It is very much calling attention to itself as a dystopia, as a dystopian story and dystopian world. This book in particular, I would say even more so than the original Hunger Games trilogy, which is insane considering this is where we see the system collapse. This book in particular really shows the cracks in the system and really shows just how broken and messed up and absolutely disgusting the whole system is. I didn't even really talk about the characters. We see so many faces that are familiar to us from the original trilogy. We get a lot of backstory to some of these characters. We get to really see them as humans in ways that we don't in the original trilogy because Katniss is very in her own head about things. And so we don't really get a clear understanding of who they are. As opposed to Haymitch, who is so much more observant's not quite the right word, but he's not quite as focused on scheming, on determining what other people's schemes might be. He is not immediately assuming ulterior motives. There is a level of trust that he has that Katniss does not. But I think this story wraps up a lot of things, a lot of questions that I feel like the original Hunger Games trilogy left, which is amazing considering this is a prequel. But it makes pretty clear who these characters are to each other, why they do the things that they do in the original trilogy. I am so severely broken. So at this point, I need to jump into the spoiler side of things, if nothing else, just because I've been blabbing for I don't even know how long, and I really need to just move on and get on with this book talk. First and foremost, the reaping itself. I feel like we get the same sort of tragic arc that we get in the original Hunger Games trilogy with Katniss and Prim, where the whole point of Katniss going into the games was to protect Prim, so that Prim was not the one being sent in. But then by the end, it's all kind of like kaplooey. We get the same sort of thing here with Haymitch and Lenore Dove. Because at the reaping, Haymitch is stepping in to protect Lenore Dove. Not from the reaping itself, but from kind of the aftermath of, what happened at the reaping. And because of this, the reaping gets rid. So Haymitch ends up being a tribute, even though originally he was not. And this right here is really only the start, the tip of the iceberg, if you will, with the ideas of propaganda and how government controls the voice and the media. Because already we're dealing with a quarter quell. This is the one where they bring in double the tribute. So instead of having 24 kids, they are bringing in 48 kids. 2 girls and 2 boys from each district. One of the boys, after having his name called, just bolts. He's out of there. And is immediately shot down. They don't go chasing after him, locking him up and forcing him to go. No, they just kill him. Just right there in the middle of the street. And it makes me wonder if a similar thing happened in any of the other districts. How many times had something like this happen where a tribute was killed for refusing to cooperate just for another name to be drawn? It is such a sick narrative, and it's weird to think about because this is a secret that would only be kept from the capital. Because if this is happening in the districts, everybody in the district is going to know about it. Because everybody in District 12 knows that this kid was killed in the middle of the street because he was trying to run away and not be a tribute. But nobody else in Panem knows. Because they reset everything up. Like it's some kind of movie. Like, we're going to do another take. Do it again with feeling. And with the second take, everything is rigged because they have already pre-selected the names at this point. And then for Luella, who dies during the parade, would have very clearly seen that Haymitch was running through the street, presenting her to Snow, making him own it, to say that her blood is on his hands. And boy, oh boy, does he own it, because he's just like, you know what? I could use some more blood. We're going to bring another person into this. In Katniss's Hunger Games, there's some hints that the government is kind of controlling the narrative of what's happening in the games. We get this whole recap, and it's clear that there are things that are being cut, things that are being omitted. But it is so severely worse with Haymitch's. The fact that he is not killed by the Mutt truly had me thinking that they would have kept his acts of rebellion in. That they would have tried to spin it some way, shape, or form instead of just completely cutting it out. Like, cutting it out makes a lot more sense. So I am not saying that as like a dig at Suzanne Collins so much as the idea of those that are controlling the media. And that's where I go back to my theory of why Haymitch survived. I really feel like Snow had some say in it. I do feel like the games were rigged in Haymitch's favor to some degree. If not, why did no Mutts go after him? Like, obviously there were some Mutts that went after him, the ladybugs and the butterflies and all that. But at no point did he experience a deadly attack. There was no horde of angry squirrels going after him. I do definitely find the parallel interesting of Luella dying during the parade. And the fact that when Snow was a mentor, like in Snow's day, in Snow's story, they just sort of accept that the tributes might die before the games. This is just a thing. It just happens. It's fine. There's something weirdly sinister about the fact that they are not accepting that these tributes might be dying before they hit the arena. There is definitely a clear message that is happening there. Maisley says something along the lines of, they will treat you like an animal if you let them. And her little quirk is always using silverware to eat. She is always trying to be prim and proper even when she is fighting for her life. And it makes me think of like some of the horror stories that you see with like SeaWorld or other animal captivity environment, where the animals are made to like perform and they appear like they're happy and well cared for, when in actuality they are experiencing severe abuse. But all of that is happening kind of behind the scenes to make them behave when they are in front of a crowd. It also kind of has the same vibe of like the parents that will go out and buy another goldfish when their kid's goldfish dies rather than explain that the goldfish died. But it's also kind of terrifying because if the government is controlling the narrative of who lives and who dies, what can't they control? And nobody in the Capitol questions it. They all just accept the ideas that are being fed to them. Because really, what is the alternative? But to the Capitol, and this is made really clear in Snow's book, but to the Capitol, the people of the districts are not people. They are less than. And I feel like I could get real philosophical, could get real meta, could get real literary audio. So semi-recently, I attended one of the stops on John Green's book tour for his latest release, Everything is Tuberculosis. And one of the big points of the conversation was on the idea of people deserving what happens to them, where things like illness are treated like they are somehow connected to morality, treated like something that they have control over, and like they did something to deserve what ails them. And I promise this is related. I think, especially when it comes to disease, like that's something that people tell themselves because it gives them comfort, because it makes them feel like they have some control over something. Of like, if I don't smoke 20 packs of cigarettes a day, I will not get lung cancer like this other person who did smoke 20 packs of cigarettes a day. They clearly deserve this because they did the thing that causes the cancer. Whereas I do not do the thing, so I should not get the cancer. I feel like there's this inherent struggle to understand or to accept that sometimes things just happen, that there is not a cause or a moral backing to things. That yes, there are things that people can do that may reduce their likelihood to experience these bad things, and there are things that people can do that increase the likelihood of these things happening. So in the world of the Hunger Games, it is supposed to be luck of the draw, or unluck of the draw. But both Haymitch and Katniss kind of have the same thing of they put their names in more times each year so that they can get extra food and supplies for their family. Increased rations. But they have no control over the fact that they're district. Just the same as the people in the Capitol have no control over the fact that they are in the Capitol. They are from the Capitol. Especially by the time that we get to Haymitch, by the time we get to Katniss, we are long past the days of being able to punish those who were part of the original uprising that caused the Dark Days. The majority of the people that would have caused the uprising are long dead. But the Hunger Games persist as a way of punishing the districts for doing this thing that nobody in the districts was involved in to begin with. And they are at this point punishing the districts simply for existing. Not because the people there did anything, because at this point, they've done nothing. They were not involved. Like, at this point, it is purely about government control and about saying the Capitol is still bigger and better than the districts, even though the districts outnumber the Capitol significantly. With some of the characterizations that we see throughout this whole saga, there's almost this belief within the folks of the Capitol that they are better and that they deserve more because they are better. They are moral. They are doing everything right. And that the districts are in a bad situation because they did this bad thing. And so they deserve this punishment because they did this bad thing, even though the people who are experiencing the bad thing were not involved. And so there's this sort of feel of morality at play, element of deserving. And I think the part that makes Haymitch's story in particular so tragic, beyond even the whole homecoming element, beyond losing the very people that he cared the most for and losing his sense of safety, because, you know, all of that kind of comes in together. But I think the part that is almost more tragic than that is that Haymitch starts to follow in that belief. Because as he is reconciling with his mom and his brother dying in the fire, he is blaming himself. He says, "My fault. It was my fault. I caused this." And while yes, to a degree, one could argue that technically his actions did lead to these consequences. First of all, Haymitch was just a pawn in the game. Not just Snow's pawn, Snow's plaything, but everybody's pawn, everybody's plaything. He is just a scared kid trying to figure out what he needs to do, trying to come into his own and being beaten down. But as the story comes to an end, there's this degree to which it's like he is starting to believe that he deserves what happened to him. Like, he believes had he done something different, things would have gone better. Even beyond his mother, his brother, his lover, all dying by Snow's hand indirectly, because people die. Because yes, that is tragic and horrific and very much a sign of how terrible the capital is, and particularly Snow. Haymitch has basically no choice other than to give up hope. There is no hope for him. He isolates himself because he thinks that's the only thing that he can do. And I feel like that's a really interesting contrast between him and a character like Beatty, who loses his son, who knows that he's going to be losing his son, who loses his son in the Hunger Games, yet there's still almost this hint of hope. Like, even beyond what we see in Catching Fire, we get this note that his wife is pregnant. Now, my biggest pet peeve with the Hunger Games in total is, like, why don't people just stop breeding? Because I feel like if they just stopped having kids, the government would stop the Hunger Games, because there's going to be issues with population decreasing. Because if you keep running the Hunger Games, eventually you're just going to run out of people. Like, refusing to populate is a form of rebellion that is severely overlooked in this world. But children are also a symbol of hope. And so while Haymitch is sinking into this pit of despair and hopelessness, we contrast that with Beatty, who is kind of in the same boat of having been put on the wrong side of the Capitol, basically put on the Capitol's hit list, yet still clinging on to this kind of hope of still procreating. I feel like there are so many things that happen in this book that we could have hours upon hours of conversation about. However, it is currently 10:30 on a Sunday night. I have work tomorrow. I also still have most of a bowl of popcorn that has turned to completely room temperature that I still need to consume. And I need to not hype myself up before I go to bed, because I feel like this gets real intense. There's just so much to say about image and the idea of who gets to shape the narrative, who gets to tell the story. And while this is Haymitch's story and Haymitch is the literal narrator, so many elements of his story are broken and replaced by the propaganda machine. I said back when I read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that I want a deeper dive into the mechanics of the political sphere in the Hunger Games universe. And I feel like, well, we don't really dive too deeply into specifically the politics, people of office, and people of power. We do get a very good sense of how the government works and why it works the way it works, and how it manages to survive as much and as long as it does, despite the opposition. Because the people of the districts don't know if there are even people that exist outside of the country, outside of Panem. There are ideas, there are theories, but nobody knows. And if there is nobody outside of Panem, there is no world outside of Panem. There is no hope for something beyond Panem. And in that isolation, it becomes this fear that the only options that you have are trekking the wilderness, hoping that the elements don't kill you, or staying and hoping the government doesn't kill you. everybody submits. This is definitely not a casual read. My goodness. There are absolutely a lot more things that we could talk about, a lot more things to be said of the Hunger Games. And part of me really wants to go back and just reread everything just to get a full sense of everything that's happening, because my brain is a little foggy on the stuff in Catching Fire and Mockingjay. Like, I have the general gist of what happened, but especially after Sunrise on the Raping, to revisit it, to get a better look at some of the characters that, you know, make that appearance. But that is for another day and another time, because Kendra needs to finish her popcorn and go to sleep. So with that, I shall ask, what are your thoughts on Sunrise on the Raping? And also, who do you think should play Haymitch Abernathy? Because I'm really struggling to picture anybody else playing Haymitch. But let me know what your thoughts are on the book as a whole, on the ideas presented in this book, because it is dense. And I say that in the best possible way. Like, it is an easy read. It is very much still at that young adult level. But my goodness, does it carry a lot. While you're down there telling me your thoughts, don't forget to like this video, give the big ol' thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel, because I post videos every so often. You would never guess I've been doing YouTube for over a decade now, but here we are. I'm gonna go. I'll see you next time.